It may be ludicrous from our point of view, of course. We don't read Hebrew or Egyptian right now. We're in the English phase of civilization. So, well, as John Twetness points out, the use of Egyptian symbols to transliterate Hebrew words and the use of Hebrew symbols to transliterate Egyptian words, both directions, both ways. This is known from texts which date right back to Nephi's day, 600 B.C. We have found archaeological discovered texts that actually show this state of affairs that the Book of Mormon says was present back then and there. This is fascinating. Very interesting. And then he talks about the texts discovered at Tel Arad and Kadesh Barnea. The Papyrus Amherst 63, for example, contains a scriptural text in a Northwest Semitic tongue, but it's written in the Egyptian script. That is so interesting. Physical evidence for the unique script is limited to the purported transcription of characters taken from the plates, as shown by Martin Harris in 1828 to Professor Charles Anthon. They consist of 7 horizontal rows of unusual markings. You've seen this, the Anthon transcript stuff. Remember the old Book of Mormons that used to be, I had some years ago, where the cover was gold and then it had all that writing on it and all that? That's where they got that idea from. Anyway, 7 horizontal rows of unusual markings. They've been described as anything from Phoenician writing to Mayan script to occult symbols from a Nubian corruption of Egyptian to a secret Masonic code. I mean, there's no end to speculation of these things, is there? Though the expression Reformed Egyptian garnered no small amount of ridicule at the time, the Tanners actually called it Deformed Egyptian in a way to make fun of it, but quite frankly, that's what it is. And we have the historical aspects of the way the Egyptian script changed, from the hieroglyphic to the demotic to the hieratic and so on and so forth. It really did change. And fascinating how that works. Well, Nibley points out that Meroitic, now we have the Meroitic language. He says it's a baffling and still largely undeciphered Egyptian script, which developed out of the Demotic under circumstances remarkably paralleling the purported development of the Nephite writing. Meroitic has seriously striking affinities to the characters on the so-called Anthon transcript. Every one of the characters match. Now that's fascinating. If Joseph Smith was just making this up, that couldn't possibly be happening. And Meroitic happens to be deformed Egyptian. That's kind of fun, isn't it? Terrell Givens, I'm on page 133 now of his book. William J. Hamblin, and William Hamblin, keep your eye on this guy. He is solid. He is one of my favorite LDS scholars. He has such powerful ways of looking at things. He's very good. He shows how other examples of mixing a Semitic language and modified Egyptian hieroglyphic characters, and he uses the Biblos-syllabic texts of Phoenicia. He shows how the Cretan hieroglyphics and the Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions of ancient Syria and Palestine also have these characteristics. Very interesting. So if the root language of the Book of Mormon is actually Hebrew, then Egyptian script notwithstanding, one would expect it to reflect Hebrew linguistic and literary patterns. And we have those in many, many cases, which I will also discuss. In the book Echoes and Evidences of the Book of Mormon, this is edited by the international Dead Sea Scroll scholar Donald W. Perry, as well as the Islamic scholar Daniel C. Peterson, and the legal scholar John W. Welch. It's a terrific editing team. Wow. This is from Farms. This is 2002, where they have amassed literally 500 pages of peculiar, odd, interesting bits of information on all aspects of the Book of Mormon. And they discuss this idea of language in the Book of Mormon as Nephi had it from the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians, right on the very first page of our Book of Mormon. It wasn't until the 20th century, however, that ancient Hebrew texts written in Egyptian script became known to scholars. We now have a number of Northwest Semitic texts, languages that are related to Hebrew, or else they are Hebrew. These are in Egyptian magical papyri. Now, these are mostly incantations. Instead of being translated, were merely transcribed in hieratic, a cursive or a reformed version of the Egyptian hieroglyphic texts that go way back to the pyramid texts, pyramid and coffin texts, several thousand years BC. That was changed. And that's what most people think of when they think about Egyptian writing, is the hieroglyphic. But we also have the Demotic, the Meroitic, and now the hieratic. So there's many, many different kinds. And the Egyptologists, Gardner and several of the Egyptologists have shown this evolution, or if you want to call it the devolution, of the Egyptian script. So it actually did occur. It makes sense for the Nephites to call their changes of the Egyptian language a reformed Egyptian, because that is precisely what they did to the script and the language. They also claim they did it with the Hebrew. So the underlying language of the Book of Mormon is a Hebrew Canaanite, an early form of the Hebrew Canaanite. The texts are found on the London Magical Papyrus, the 14th century BC, the Harris Magical Papyrus, the 13th century BC, the Papyrus Anastasi I in the 13th century BC, and the Ostracon 25759 Recto, the 11th century BC. And this is some of John Gee's research, the LDS Egyptologist out of BYU. So it's interesting because this last text on one side is pure Egyptian hieratic, while the text on the other side is an early form of Hebrew, which is written in hieratic characters. It's fascinating. That interesting combination of the Hebrew and Egyptian. All of these documents were discovered and translated long after the Book of Mormon had appeared. Papyrus Amherst, Papyrus 63, a document of the 4th century BC, written in a cursive, a reformed Egyptian script called Demotic, but whose underlying language is Aramaic, which is a sister language to Hebrew. Among the writings included in the religious text written in this combination of language is our Psalm 20, verses 2 through 6. So we actually have a demonstration of Scripture being written in these two different scripts and languages in a combination, exactly as the Book of Mormon says. So archaeologically, historically, and culturally, the Book of Mormon in verses 2 and 3 is amply confirmed. And I have multitudinous other texts, but I think this makes the point that between the first autobiographical colophon of Nephi, jumping into the language of the combination of the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians, and the actual archaeological discovered texts, which deal explicitly in a mixing of these two languages, the Book of Mormon is starting out with an enormous, big start. And this is, I believe, one of Nibley's powerful points. This is in the Book of Mormon authorship, New Light on Ancient Origins. It's edited by Noel B. Reynolds, who is now the academic vice president of BYU. And it's in it's volume 7 in the Religious Studies monograph series. This is absolutely one of my favorite books. It's a 1982 book. It's in Nibley's analysis called Two Shots in the Dark, where he discusses the Lakish letters, the idea of the background of the Book of Mormon. And they are a star witness to the correctness of the Book of Mormon. The Lakish letters were writings on bits of pottery that had been broken up and destroyed. And as the Jews at Lakish, which is a little bit north of Jerusalem, as they physically, literally saw the Babylonians coming up over the horizon to destroy them, 600 BC, they were hurrying and writing down instructions to each other and discussing strategies of, here comes the bad guys, and we're in trouble here, man. The Babylonians came and completely wiped out Jerusalem, Lakish, and all the environs. At that very moment, these Lakish letters were written. fascinating. They are a star witness to the correctness of the Book of Mormon's opening scenes of the terrible destruction that was going to occur, and there came that day many prophets, the Book of Mormon says, and I'll get to that.